Okay, welcome back. It is the May edition of Trust Your Gut. I'm Erin Trent Johnson, transformational leadership coach, and I'm here with my Ayurvedic doctor, Dr. A. Antonio Aragona, doctor of Ayurvedic medicine. And Dr. A, how are you?
Hey, I'm great, Aaron. Good to be back. It's May, almost June, and then that means half the year is almost done already.
This year.
And time is flying now, whereas the beginning of the year seemed like it was never going to leave us from January. But I'm well, yeah. Good to be here talking about, my favorite topic. One of my favorite topics besides just food in general.
Yes. Well, I love it. We can definitely talk about food. I know we will. But yeah, we're also in the midst of allergy season. Or for I know there are different allergy seasons, and we talk about seasons and seasonal living as when we talk about Ayurveda um and the seasonal change and transition that we prepare ourselves for. And yeah, I'd love to really dig into to allergies, especially as someone who has experienced the most intense allergies in this window of time. May usually takes me out.
Yeah.
I've actually been doing pretty well since Panchakarma, just have to say. No antihistamines. Just have to say, or no pharmaceutical antihistamines. So we could talk about that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm happy. Yeah, so we'll start with a shloka, as always, is tradition.
Hmm.
And then we'll just jump into some of these things from this shloka. So this is from Charaka, of course. Um, Tasya Shita Dhyaya Dharanam Balam Vanascha Vardhate Yasyartu Samatyam Viditam Chestahara Vyapashrayam. Very short and sweet. And what does this mean? So it means the vigor and complexion is promoted in a person who knows and follows seasonal dietary and lifestyle regimen. In this dietary consideration includes various types of food articles, which are called ashita, which is eatables, kadita, which is chewables, pita, which is drinkables, and lidha, which is lickables. And so, like, what does this mean? First, he says, these are the four main ways that we consider when we're eating something: eatable, lickable, drinkable, and chewables. So anything that you're digesting, anything you're putting in to the mouth, whether it's liquid or solid, basically, in any of the forms of the solids, um, it's going to be counted as something that you're eating. So if you're snacking, that's you're eating. It's just a really small type of meal. If you're having an actual meal, then that's a meal. And if you're doing like protein shakes, it's a drinkable, but it's a liquid. And so that's counted kind of as a meal you know. And so we think about the status of digestion, because that's the foundation of health in so many ways in Ayurveda, that when there are issues like allergies, for sure, with certainty, there is the tie to what the digestive system is doing. Now, um, and in this context of this shloka, within the context of the chapter that it's in, it's talking about, daily practices, dinacharya and ritacharya, which is the seasonal practices. And so, um, I think we've talked about this in the last podcast about the seasonality of health and disease kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it's like, what season is it? And we can dissect that word in many ways and apply it to different contexts of a person's stage in life, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, Sunday versus Tuesday versus December versus September versus, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years to come, 10 years to come, 20 years to come. Like, what's the season? When you're a child, adolescent to adult, like the season, all these kind of things are considered. Um, and so, with something like allergies, which can be complex for some people, they might come this season and say, Oh yeah, I don't have any issues with spring allergies. I tend to have fall issues, fall allergy issues. Or they come in the fall and they're like, yeah, fall's pretty good. But when the springtime comes, my allergies kick in really intensely. And then there are some rare cases that are like, it just seems like it's year round, right? And so in Ayurveda, these are telltale signs of like certain things pathologically that have formed in certain areas of the physiology that have accumulated a certain amount of like pressure, tension, or just unprocessed stuff. And, um, so depending on when a person comes in, if they're like in the peak of allergy season, they're having peak allergies, there are things that we could do with starting with dietary lifestyle adjustments um, to reduce it. And won't get rid of it because you're in the thick of it. And what brought you here was something that's been here for a while, so it's going to take time for excavating. Similarly, if you come in, you're like, oh, I have some basic health issues, but I know in the fall my allergies get bad. Well, this is good. We have more time to work on these things now to prepare you for the fall, so there's less of an incident, if any at all, by the time fall comes, you know. Then also there's a seasonality of like age, like I mentioned, where if a person's in their 60s, 70s, and they're like, oh, I've had lifelong allergies. Well, it's going to take a lot more time, work, um, and diligence to address something that's been around for that long. When it's earlier on in life, generally it's easier to manage when it's earlier in time because it's been less time to accumulate and become other things. And then also, with the influence of Western over-the-counters, the more time a person's spent intimately with these over-the-counter medicines, the more time they've had to push things in places where it doesn't belong, putting more band-aids on top of band-aids on top of band-aids until the dam breaks. Then you put a big piece of duct tape and then it redirects somewhere else, and then that breaks, and then you're doing this, and then all of a sudden you're taking inhalers and steroids and antihistamines morning, afternoon, evening injections, getting um, deviated septum surgeries and all these kind of things to try to like correct the thing that's accumulating on a deeper level that requires proper excavation.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
So, well, I was curious because some of the things that you were mentioning, I feel like are experiences that a lot of times we feel like, oh, well, this is just what comes with um, with my body, right? Like allergies are often seen as, and then also I think the subsequent experiences that come with allergies, an allergy to something. Well, this is just something I have. I was born with this. Our family has this. So there's a family story, there's a historical story, and I'm hearing you name or speak to the fact that these are not inevitable experiences. Like I've had deviated septum surgery, and the probably almost 12 or 14 years ago, and going to the doctor and hearing, well, you have a deviated septum. Oh, that's something I'm born with. I was born with this, and therefore this is a part of my physiology and my history, and so it needs to be corrected. Um, but I'm hearing you say something that sounds a bit different. That there are accumulated experiences that lead to these shifts in our physiology.
yeah. And let me expand upon that too. There's a seasonality to like if we're gonna bring in, aspects of Ayurveda that include ancestral lineage, inheritance, all their life, past karma stuff. This all gets understood in the context of Ayurveda as like, it could be this. And so when a child is born with something like a deviated septum or any conditions that a child expresses other than proper health, which is without any symptoms, when they have symptoms, even from birth, it just means what did they inherit while they were in the womb for the 9 months that was cultivated by the parents, for sure, because that's the environment that you're living in, right? So if we look at Western psychology, nature versus nurture, what environment are you surrounded with? If you're this little being floating in this, placenta, this plasma sort of body surrounding you, and the nutrients are coming through the umbilical cord, but the plasma and the placenta and the embryonic fluid, all this stuff is sort of surrounding you as a cocoon or an egg. and the quality of that, quality of the parent's mind, and I say parents plural, like it's mother and father, you know, in the atmosphere are influencing these things, causing, say, pressure changes on many levels, physiological, psychological, emotional, spiritual. And so the child coming into this environment, and we can go even further and say, well, on some level, if we believe in this, um, the child chose this gateway into the world with this experience for whatever reason. And so if they're born with a deviated septum, for example, then it might be part of their journey to get corrective surgery. Because in Ayurveda we have, Shalya Chikitsa, which is the surgical department, and sometimes surgeries are necessary. I mean, it's part of medicine. All systems of medicine have a surgical aspect of it, and so it's like, well, and then if that gets corrected, then and essentially if that is the root cause, then it goes away.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't go away, which I've had patients come and they've had like deviated septums to a significant degree that they've had surgery. I had a woman in New Jersey. She was in her mid 50s and she was a nurse and she had varicose veins and deviated septum. She was overweight. She was cholesterol, blah, blah, blah. She got the surgery and she's like, I never knew I could actually breathe like this. And she's like, every time I do Nadi Shodhana, which is this breathing technique in yoga, I struggle, and now I can do it very easily. And she had
Hmm.
more allergies from that cause, but her diet still needed to be corrected. Her lifestyle needed to be corrected. Herbs had to be put in place to clear out and excavate things that have accumulated in the background, you know. And so, to that degree, Ayurveda says that's possible too. It just depends on the person and it gets understood per person. There's no one size
Hmm.
fits all assessment, and it's like knowing the root cause of like
Hmm.
um it's like I have a patient that he has Meniere's and he's prone to like headaches and he's prone to like immunological stuff, and like his immune system's not the strongest. And when I work with him, I was like, did you suffer from earaches when you were a kid and a lot of colds? He's like, oh yeah, a lot of colds and a lot of earaches. And I said, do you remember as far back? He's like, as far back as I remember. I was like, yes. That means the quality of your tissues was compromised when you were conceived. You inherited this sort of deficiency, which created this pathology from that point in time, which makes sense why you have the Meniere's in your case, plus other things that he talks about. Like he likes hot, spicy food. I'm like, well, you're depleting a certain tissue that's actually supporting the body to have less of immunological issues and you're drying it out. So this is a cause and effect in Ayurveda, but yours started in childhood also. If you had this tendency of earaches and colds when you were a kid, that means your tissue, in Ayurveda we call it rasa dhatu, which is like the tissue of seven tissues. If that's compromised, that's very an important piece in like knowing like if this kid, if I have a child that comes in and I assess them and I'm like, oh, they're having colds and allergies, from an Ayurvedic perspective, I will say in 40 years, you will have Meniere's, you will have vertigo, you will have tinnitus, you will have, like, I know you will,
Mm.
with almost certainty, because in Ayurveda, we see the connections all the time, and each person's connections, are very, are different. And in Ayurveda, when they list, diseases, it's like, here are the precursors to create these particular diseases. This is where it comes from, and you understand the history. And a lot of it is still adjusted per diet and lifestyle. And the basic fundamentals, and it can't be ever emphasized enough in any podcast, is like what time are you waking up? What time are you going to sleep? What time are you eating your meals? When are you exercising? When are you pooping? When are you peeing? When are you sweating? When are you having sex? When are you, meditating? When are you in silence? When are you like, what are you buying when you're buying at the store to put on your body? Whether it's a deodorant, whether it's a eyeliner, whether it's a perfume, whether it's a soap, whether it's what kind of meat are you getting? The veggie burgers that have like 35 different ingredients and then been frozen and then hard to digest, and then you're thinking it's healthy, but it's really not healthy. Like it's all these little things. In Ayurveda, we can make the connections all the time, which is why like
Hmm.
Ayurveda is that amazing and successful and efficient because it looks at things from such a different holistic perspective, and you can't discount things as like this person came into this lifetime with other things karmically. If we pull in Jyotish Vedic astrology, it pulls in like, oh, this is where this came from, and this is why your body's going through this, and you have to use this gem, you have to use this mantra, you have to wear this color, you have to fast on Tuesday, you have to, show homage on Saturdays to the family because the ancestors have to be acknowledged because somehow, like these are all the things that in Ayurveda, such a beautiful, complex, complete science.
Yes. I,
And there's no science like it as thorough. And I've studied all the other sciences. All the other sciences are great. Naturopathy is cute. Homeopathy is lovely. Chinese medicine is amazing. Like, of course, every medicine is having their body of relationship to the world. And Ayurveda really goes beyond the home run.
hmm Well, I wanna come back to um, this question of root cause, because I think this is where we always I think find we excavate, right, with Ayurveda. And I think that that also is why it has been so deeply potent and powerful for me, as both in my own health and healing practice and approach to living, and also in my practice in working with leaders and people who are committed to justice and transformation. And so, this idea that we are getting to the root of allergies, like something that is a reaction to an imbalance in the environment, or an imbalance, as you're speaking to so clearly, with digestion. And I wonder if we could explore that. Like, what are the root causes of allergies?
Yeah, I mean, root causes of allergies, I mean, again, if you have like a genetic inheritance towards this because your mom had allergies, your dad had allergies, your brothers have allergies, your great grandmother had allergies, then it's like what caused the disruption in the chain of health for these individuals? They could have, grandma could have been exposed in the late 1800s to the, technological innovation of like metal and steel living along the rivers where coal was being, processed, and then everything was just put into the rivers, and then she was drinking, she was eating the tomato from the soil that had this runoff, like, and then it created this corruption in the tissues, and then it started manifesting this way, and then she got pregnant, and then in that manifested state, whatever the health is of the individual as they're conceiving, that's the first imprint that sets the tone on the physiology, plus their own genetic information in the DNA, right? So it's like great grandma, great great aunt, great blah blah blah, all these things. And so, then it creates this chain of events. It could be like, oh, parents were pretty good. They're from the generation where there wasn't any kind of pesticides and hormones and genetically modified foods, and everything was in their whole form without the wax coating that gets put on plant, things that get shipped from across the country. And then you're digesting this wax, and then, and then it's like there's this corruption of tissue. And then it could be as simple as, person um, ate, per their constitution, was eating a lot of like, breads, cheeses, ice cream, ice in all the food, in all the drinks all the time, iced beverages, frozen beverages, all these things, and that creates a corruption. Staying up late can be like things that, these are the things that can corrupt tissue for sure. Staying up late, staying up late in Ayurveda is like you stay up past 10 o'clock. Technically, everyone should be asleep by 10. I kind of push it since I'm like, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I think 11's a good spot. So between 11, 10 and 11, it's good. Then you're up, whatever natural time between 6 and 7, but it's like if you're corrupting the digestive system, if you're tainting, the quality of your daytime schedule where you're like eating at inappropriate times, like you get hungry at 12, but you went to the yoga class because that's the only time that one yoga class that one teacher teaches is at 12, but you're hungry. You do the yoga instead, and then you eat after. No, you already caused a corruption. It's very simple. And the interesting thing about it is like Ayurveda knows this for over 8,000 years. And some people are like, oh, Ayurveda is not for me. Oh, man, well, no, it's not because it holds you accountable. It doesn't allow you to have excuses. It understands you will have excuses because we all have some sort of unruly mind that decides, we've talked about this many times, um, pranyabharada, which is like misuse of intelligence. It's like, oh, I
Hmm
feel sick. and I should probably have soup, but I really want pizza because it looks good. Well, it won't taste good because it's not going to do that. It's just your emotional unruliness that's calling in. You're going to get more congested, and now your tonsils are swollen. You don't know why. And then, it's like you made the wrong choice. And so it's like the same thing with Ayurveda. You could choose not to do Ayurveda and ignore it. It doesn't mean things are going to change for you because it just means you're avoiding taking accountability and responsibility, and therefore you're going to figure out another route. But I can tell you that with certainty, Ayurveda is an amazing route to follow. It does require diligence. It does develop mental discipline over time if you stick with it, if you have the capacity to stick with it. The science works. It's if you work for it.
Hmm.
And so all these kind of things, if you're doing incompatible foods, if you're eating bacon, egg, well, in Europe, it's not as crazy with all the mixing of foods per se. Um, as it is in the US. There's quite the contrast in portion size, US versus um, Europe, for example.
Hmm.
I mean, Europe has gotten also guilty over the past 25 years that the Western infiltration of the dietary module and modeling has imposed itself somehow, and it was allowed in because we have more American tourists that expect more things, and so you want these tourist places that thrive on tourism to meet the American standard. But we eat like pigs in the US. Everything is big and large
Hmm.
and a lot and intense and super size and triple size and quadruple size and four burgers and and this is like, and then you wonder why. It's like, well, I'm eating beef. Well, first of all, let's question, are you really eating beef? Like, are you getting it as 100% whole grade pure beef from an unadulterated cow that hasn't been tainted by GMOs and limited to a small space where they can't move around and they're just being mass produced because they have to meet the quantity of the population that's growing too fast that the world's not sustaining? Are you thinking that consciously about things? Most likely not. You're just going because it's cheap and it's easy. It seems fun. You want the three burgers, then you want to add the cheese, then you want to add the bacon, and then you want to, then do the fries, and then you want to do the milkshake with this kind of thing, and then you wonder why you have allergies.
Hmm.
Like it's the size, it's a matra and kala. So it's like timing and portions. It's like eat when you're hungry. You eat to um you eat to the point where you start to feel full. You don't eat to, and that is also translated to capacity, with the understanding that you're still leaving a portion of the stomach a little empty so that you can digest what's in the stomach. You're not trying to pack the stomach full completely. You know, when I have
Hmm.
patients that are like, "Oh, I have a board meeting, that's a few hours over lunch," and I'm like, "Well, that's hard because then you're most likely going to be hungry." And I've had a patient that was like, "I wasn't hungry for breakfast, but I forced myself to eat a lot so that it can hold me over during that lunchtime when I wasn't going to eat." I'm like, no, if that's the lifestyle that you're living, you're most absolutely going to have disease.
Hmm.
Like like it's unfortunate because contemporary living, I think we talked about this before. It's called Gramya dosha, which is like the disease manifestation based on living in contemporary times and in city life. Gramya means village, and like dosha is like that can be corrupted or tainted. And it's like when you translate it from the Sanskrit, it's like modern day living is its own pathology. You're on the go, no time for this, no time for that. Well, when you don't make time for good health, disease will certainly make good time for you.
That's right.
And then you're like, this is inconvenient. Well, how many times did you stay up late to try to do your report? How many times did you break dawn because you had the deadline and et cetera, et cetera. And and sometimes it's like, well, you need to make a living. Yes, of course. And and this is applying to like natural standards of the average person waking up and having a 9 to 5 job. For people, this part of the conversation in this podcast isn't applying per se to people that have like night shifts. You know,
Hmm.
surgeons or fire department, firemen or police officers, because we need 24/7, services for certain things. They just have to understand that because they're not in alignment with the natural cycle of the day, the seasonality of the day, doshas going through their time clocks, so that's not going to change. They're going to be prone to things. You're not going to have 100% health. You cannot. There's just no way. And so you have to understand how much momentum can you slow down by the other days when you're not working the night shift, when you're off, when you're like, can you counter the momentum? That it's really about momentum because the doshas, when they're in balance, in an imbalanced homeostatic state for the individual's personalized constitutional makeup, the swasta, a person's established in themselves. Um, it's like they're going to be certain tendencies you're prone towards this knowing of, but in that healthy state, it maintains the health. It's just when these kind of like configurations of the physiology, the doshas, the elements, are going outside of their own nature to an excess an excess could be either depletion, because depletion is the opposite end of too much, too little. It's an excess of, it's the absence of, which is also implying like there's an excess of something to cause something else. You know, if you're
Yes.
doing too much of one thing, there's going to be less of something else.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that extreme implies that there is an extreme either way, because the body's always going to find balance. And it's like if you go, 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 you crash, you get sick, and then you're just out for the count for like 2 weeks. You're in the other extreme now of depletion.
Well, I'm curious, as we've been talking through the practices that lead to that or that can lead to and form allergy or allergic response, and we've actually been, I want to clarify because we've been talking a little bit about, or what it seems like to me, talking about nasal allergies and seasonal allergies, but we know that, but we also, there are these connections that even as you were speaking to foodborne allergies and other immune responses and reactions to the environment, to our
Mhm.
to what we're taking in, what we're eating, ingesting. And so I'm curious, where you might identify um, some connections that maybe people aren't making, right? That Ayurveda sees.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I already can see all of it. It's quite fascinating. So, I mean, if we're talking about like basic allergies where you're sneezing, hay fever, congestion, you know, like allergies itself, and if you have a pre-existing like condition like asthma, then of course then your asthma kicks up too, and both types of respiratory conditions definitely have their roots in much of the digestive system. you know
Mhm.
if you have the type of allergy that's like celiacs, you're allergic to certain foods, or your gluten sensitivity, or you get hives from drinking wine, like these kind of things that you have a reaction to. You might not have allergies, but very often I do see that if people even have these kind of conditions that are rooted in the digestive system, they have some sort of allergy. So you have to think, what is the connection between like respiratory and digestive system, and digestive issues? IBS, different types of IBS can cause allergies as a byproduct. But you're
Mhm.
taking the Zyrtec, you're taking the Benadryl, you're taking the nasal sprays, and yet the root is the digestive system malfunctioning in the intestines, the small intestine, the stomach itself, you know.
Mhm.
And so it's like, which kind of allergy do you have? Because then you're going to trace back to how long have you had this for? Did this start when you were a kid, when you were getting stomach aches regularly, or did you not eat very much, or you know, um, were you having a hard time sleeping, and did you get earaches as a kid, or weeks, like uh, tonsils swelling up? Like that's a common thing, like tonsillectomies. It's like, well, why don't you get to like why is it that things are not draining properly and they're accumulating and stagnant here? What else is happening somewhere else? It's not enough to think, well, I inherited it from my mom. She had tonsillectomy too because her tonsils were swollen. Well, that means the cellular structure, the matrix of that level of physiology remembered this. And so what triggered it to perpetuate?
Yes.
And so if we're coming back to basic allergies and you're like, well, everyone in my family has allergies. Yeah. Well, what's the diet like? What's the lifestyle like? You know, it's easy to blame just on one. Everyone's trying to find the one thing. It's always the one thing everyone's looking for. The one magic pill, the one
Hmm.
magic bullet, the one magic cause. And in Ayurveda, it's never just the one thing.
No, I mean, this also speaks to the way that we view systems in organizations and, the social living systems, right? Whether education, housing, health, public health, these are complex, adaptive living systems. And so the idea that we would be able to apply like one response or solution to ameliorate or address cycles and patterns um, is is also the challenge there. And so I'm as I'm sitting with this, I'm really reflecting on, what are the fractal, the small
Hmm.
changes that we can practice. But also this is the mindset that I think as people are thinking about health, to bring that kind of complexity, understanding to our bodies as living systems,
Hmm.
and to consider um, both what we know that all that we've known, I think, for generations. This is like the remembering, even as you're talking about the cellular memory, remembering, how we were able to nourish our bodies before there was such a prominence of, so many foodborne allergies, celiacs, disease, or all, gluten intolerance, in ways that didn't exist maybe 40 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's very true. When I was doing one of my first clinicals in India around 2000, I think it was 2009. The professor pulled up on the screen a graph that he created, which is I wish I could get it. I could should have if I had a smartphone, I would have taken a snapshot of the photo of the image. But it showed, since the late 1800s, as technology advanced and technology of food advanced, which happened after the 19 late 40s, 50s when we started doing more canning of things, so did the increase of disease, digestive
Mhm.
issues, allergies, IBS. And it's not, like sometimes the argument is like, well, we weren't able to identify what these things were because some of these things were happening back then. Well, of course, some of the things were happening back then because, unless you tell me that you didn't add cheese to the burger, because cheese has been around for a while, to whatever meat you were eating in the late 1800s, just that itself is going to cause a reaction. So now you're adding these processed cheeses that are more contaminated with food coloring and the processed meats that have the GBHs, you know, you're playing with chemistry. So of course, and that started in like the late 50s, 60s. So it's like if you look at time, kala, we talked about three causes of disease, pranya parada, which is like the misuse of intelligence, the asap mendriyarta samyoga, which is the misuse of the senses, you know, and then parinam, which is, linear time, biological time. You look at kala, which is time, and you look at the timeline of when we developed, power lines, when they were first below ground, first or but then above ground. And then, when we added in, the plastics, like when we started creating plastics and that sort of period of time, the science was against indicating that the people that worked in these the plastic factories were getting cancers and having these health issues, and then they were breeding, producing children with ailments, and eventually that science had to get turned around by the government that said there's too many people that are realizing and really protesting that we can't not acknowledge this. It's like cigarettes, right? It
Mhm.
took too many people after billions of deaths and millions of dollars for the cigarette industry to indicate, well, there could be some health issues now. Don't do this when you're pregnant. It's
Yeah.
like pranya parada, misuse of intelligence, right? So then we have to look at time. And, the thing is like, I think we live more in a culture today, especially in the West, versus other countries, um, that we're anesthetized. I mean, we're not encouraged to think individually, right? We have this sort of monopoly and this sort of mono conveyor belt of an assembly line of education that everyone has to do this exactly this way, versus like some kids have a different learning capacity. And if you
Hmm.
fall out of that bell curve and you're out the outside and you must need an IEP because you're having some sort of developmental issue, and then we've created more pathologies just by
Hmm.
exclusion instead of,
That's right.
well, maybe not everyone learns the same way, and it doesn't make them an idiot if they can't become a doctor or scientist. Like, and that's a whole different conversation. So it's understanding where are we living, and this level of understanding, articulation, uh, consideration, um, requires education, and so you have to kind of like know that there's a veil. You have to pierce the veil with ongoing study and really looking at things from a bigger picture. And you look at, from the scientific standpoint, like, when did this thing develop? What was around that time also developing,
Hmm.
making these connections. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. A lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people think it's just a lot of work. So they just go to a doctor that does a lot of this study and then depend on the authority, without being taught to think. It's like, you come to see me, I'm not going to enable you. In
That's
Ayurveda,
right.
it's not enabling. It's like, no, you can't have that bacon, egg, and cheese. I'm sorry. You're having gastritis, you're having ulcerative colitis, you're having allergies, respiratory congestion and post-nasal drip all the time, and you're staying up late. I'm not going to say take these herbs that counter it, because there aren't enough strong herbs to counter the weight of the diet and lifestyle being poor.
Right.
This is not. There's no magic pill. There are really powerful, potent herbs. Of course, they work more efficiently when the diet's aligned, when the lifestyle is aligned, when um, to the best degrees possible, and any um, step in that direction will show you the positive outcome of that investment in time.
Hmm.
Maybe you're going to bed at 3 in the morning and you're expecting certain herbs to do certain things, but you were going to bed at 3 in the morning for 15 years. Well, herbs won't work as much, but if you start going to bed by 1, and then after a month, maybe by 12, then you've increased the efficacy of the herbs just by taking the same herb.
That's right.
You know, like, I'm not going to say stop going to bed at 3 and just go right to sleep at 10. That's never going to happen. No one can do that. Unless you're given a Western medicine like morphine or uh, something. And then even then, so then it's like you gotta, if you wind up into a condition, you have to wind down out of the condition appropriately too. You can't go
That's right.
from 0 to 100 and 100 back to 0. You cannot. But diet and lifestyle are the things that have to always be regulated properly, so that it, because it's the thing that keeps the doshas in equilibrium as much as possible. It's the only primary thing. Diet and lifestyle, ahar and vihar, are the primary medicines. Then we break it down to like, what is the quality of food that you're eating? Okay, cool. You're eating crappy food, but you're eating at any time of day because you're just on the go all the time. Well, now you're eating the crappy food, but now it's at breakfast, lunch, and dinner time. You're gonna get benefits from that, surprisingly.
This is really helping me think of allergies as um, this like new or in a new way, really thinking of them as a signal, that there is a signal to excavate what am I practicing every day,
Yeah.
and that they are not normalized, because I think that's what's really sitting here for me. Like what I'm really sitting with is the normalization, and that I think we have an invitation to insight, really, to really
Hmm.
sit with what am I practicing
Yeah.
every day, and
Yep.
what can I try to practice differently in alignment with what my body does tolerate.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm wondering if you have any closing thoughts, and maybe there's a connection back to our original shloka, or Anything
Yeah.
that's emerging for you?
Well, when you think of the three primary words, dinacharya, ratricharya, and ritucharya. So dina is daily, charya. Ratricharya is nighttime, regimen, and ritu charya, which is seasonal regimen. The common word is charya, which is regimen, which we require a regimen and the consistency of that regimen. I remember a teacher in one of my previous schools that said, the body is a historical, um, it, you know, it's historical and it requires consistency for health. And
Hmm.
so it's the consistency of the thing. And you can be consistent with like I eat whenever I feel like, and that's consistent. That's not consistent. Eating with the daily cycle. And so the charya, the regimen of following, when the sun rises, when the sun's peaking, when the sun is setting, you know, as long as we're living in discordance with the cycle, the season of the day, season of the year, season of the life, then you're bound to be, so we have to understand like what does this really mean to be in alignment with things. And, you know, a simple thing to consider is if you're having symptoms, the body never lies. It's telling you something. So you have to understand, well, why is it producing this? Right? If
Yes.
if I'm getting hyperacidity once in a while, and that's increasing over the past couple months from like once every 3 weeks to once a week to once a day, don't just go take the Tums or take the Pepto or take, any milk, something just to quell it. Why am I having acidity? Maybe because I'm eating the bacon, egg, and cheese every day, and then I'm having the egg and cheese for breakfast with bacon, and then I'm having staying up late, and I'm having the alcohol, and yeah. And it's not like Ayurveda saying like you must be purist and you should be never have a glass of wine, and maybe you can't ever have, like a bacon, egg, and cheese. Maybe like, you know, if it's once a year, it's going to be the least harmful. But
Yes.
what can be understood is that when you do create space for the inner intelligence of the body, the interest in having that, you're probably going to just look at that and be like, oh no, that doesn't feel right at all.
Hmm.
Because on a pharmacological level, when you think about bacon, egg, and cheese and why they don't go together, and then your body's gotten so much better, and you put that in your body again, you'll have a quick, like, oh, I don't like this. I'll never have this again. And that's good. That means the intelligence has increased. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to live a boring life. You can have a very extraordinary life. I mean, part of the reason why I post on my Instagram or Facebook, photos of food that I make, 90% of the time it's like all aligned with like compatibility stuff. Um, you can eat lovely.
Yes.
And with just some fine attunements to what the meal is. And then you're like, oh, okay. It's simple. Like I have a patient that asked me about raviolis, and I'm like, that's great. Have the raviolis. He's like, well, then I'm going to follow it up with a meatball. I'm like, nope. You're either going to have pasta with the sauce and vegetables and the meatball, or you're going to have the raviolis with the vegetables and no meatball. And he's like, oh, I'm like, that's simple.
Hmm. Not mixing the meat and cheese.
Yeah. And so thinking
Hmm.
about regimen, but thinking about how is this really making sense in my body?
Yeah.
Um, and how am I using my body as my guide?
Yes.
If I'm having acidity, if I can't even sleep properly, if I'm having hot flashes, if I'm having congestion after it, even immediately after eating a meal, that tells you something. You shouldn't ignore it and be like, oh, I'm just going to take an antihistamine because now I'm congested. No, no, let's backtrack. Like, why are you having this? Because it's not normal. You should be able to eat all foods, if they're all properly portioned, timed, and combined. You don't notice any effects. You shouldn't have really any gas, bloating, indigestion, constipation, diarrhea, congestion, headaches. So you shouldn't have symptoms. That means your body absorbed it, digested it, and is like ready. If you have symptoms, then that means, oh, I need to look at why. And then you come see someone like me, and then we tell you why. And you might not like
Well,
it. You might be upset, but You'll thank me in the end when you're feeling much better and you're like, wow, I don't have any allergies and I can enjoy this food and I don't have to worry about, I don't have to live a very limited diet in the bigger picture of things. Maybe immediately when you're working with someone, because you have to eliminate things that are all the causative things that are not good. You get to the other side, you're like, this is really nice.
Yes, and that really nice is what continues to reinforce your own intelligence. This
Yes,
trusting
yes,
that you know because you have been listening to your body, you have been paying attention. So this is great. I want to thank you, Dr. A, again. And where can people find you? They want to work with you.
yeah. I mean, I'm available telehealth around the globe, so it doesn't matter which time zone, we make it work. That's still pointayurveda.com.
All right. Well, we will see you in June. Hopefully, we will have moved smoothly through this allergy season. I continue to,
Mhm.
and look forward to seeing you next time.
Yes, thank you. See you guys next time.
Okay.